I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Today, I interview Shane and Victoria McDowell from Stockholm, Sweden. Listen as they share how they made their decision to go on the foreign mission field, how they didn't really like each other for 5 years and then ended up getting married, how Shane has type 1 diabetes and still went overseas to preach the word. They share about what's been most challenging and rewarding for them in Stockholm, and what it's like to enjoy only 6 hours of sunlight a day during the winter. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. I hope you're looking forward to the Climb Conference this next year. It starts November 30th in Dallas, Texas, 2023, and I hope that you're making plans to go and putting it in your budget. I know some of you are like, oh, it's so far away, it's such a long time from now, and also we live overseas, but no matter where you live, I really want you to try to make plans to go for this because it's going to be an amazing time. Small church leaders, future missionaries, current missionaries are going to be gathering from all over the world, and it's going to be an awesome gathering. People who are just like you, working in the mission field, working to save souls. We're going to be sharing ideas, helping each other to grow and to go. So please make plans to go to the Climb Small Church Leadership Conference November 30th of 2023. Are you interested in doing campus ministry and then leading your own church? I'm looking for a couple to replace Kevin and Erica Liu on the campus at the University of Arizona. They leave in September of 2023 to go overseas to the Revive EE program. And so if you're interested in becoming a church planter, an evangelist, women's ministry leader, I'd like to ask you to email me and let's talk about our ministry incubator program. I'm looking for someone who wants to start on campus and then in time lead their own church. The unique aspect of this program is that you'll have someone to walk with. I spent 4 days a week on campus this last fall with Kevin and Erica, Felipe Marias, Ed Mejia, and I walked with them. I walked with the students. I met someone personally, studied with them, and baptized them. If you're looking for hands-on spiritual training or know of someone who is, please email me at rob@robskinner.com. That's rob@robskinner.com. This is a paid position. Also, if you're an adult who'd like to lead a small church in a suburban setting, I'm working to plant churches around the Tucson metropolitan area. So let's say you're thinking about retiring, or maybe you're an empty nester, and you're thinking about moving to the sunny Southwest. Why not Tucson? I'm looking for married couples with kids, empty nesters, retirees, who are interested in being on a team or leading a mission team in a suburban setting in Tucson. So email me about that at rob@robskinner.com. Shane and Victoria, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. We're honored to be on it with you.
I know, it's really, we ran into each other in Orlando at the conference, and I've been trying to get a hold of you guys. I know you guys have been busy and all sorts of stuff. You've got a baby. But I'm really thankful that you guys came on because I'm so interested in what's in the world's happening in Scandinavia. I got a chance to talk to Chris Reed a while back, and Chris said, hey, you got to talk to Shane and Victoria. And so thank you for making the time.
Of course.
Yes, and we just want to actually thank you. We want to take the opportunity. We've listened to your interviews probably past 2 years now on and off, and they've been an inspiration for us. And I know for myself, there have been a fair few times where I've been out and about in the cold, dark rain and grabbed another person to just share my faith based on that inspiration.
Wow.
So thanks so much.
Well, how'd you guys become Christians?
I've actually always had a faith my whole life, and I always really wanted to be a Christian. And I grew up in Virginia, and was exposed to a lot of different kinds of Christianity and different kinds of churches and believers. Um, and it left me feeling kind of confused, really, about what was true, or what it meant to live out faith, or different pictures of God, how to reconcile those, or what was the most important parts. And it made me really want to seek out what is this really about, what's true. And that also, though, made me kind of insecure in my faith, and made me feel like I wasn't really sure. Am I a good Christian? Am I really living this out? How do I know? So I just tried to be as active in the way that I knew how, whatever way I could. And eventually, when I started my freshman year of college, I went to Virginia Tech. I was very convinced. I had this strong feeling like God has sent me here, and I need to find out why. But pretty early on, I was looking in all the wrong places and started to maybe use that as a justification to sin, of, if God put me here, then this must be okay, kind of
Right.
mentality. And it didn't take very long for all of that to have an effect on me. And I remember very clearly around Christmas time, my freshman year, thinking, I am not good at being in control of my own life. Like, I am not a good God over my own life.
Mm.
So in the spring semester, I decided to try to make some changes. And one of those was that I felt like I was at least happy when I was doing kind of more Christian things. So I prayed to find a Bible study group. And then 2 days later, in the dining hall, I was getting dinner, and I ran into a girl who sat next to me in one of my classes. And she invited me to their Bible study group that night, to their Bible talk. And I did not dare say no, because I knew it was an answered prayer. So I went, and I was just so moved by what I saw and what I heard and what I learned. And I was like, I have to figure this out. And one of the things that struck me was I perceived it as everybody was very confident in their faith.
Mm.
So I was like, how did you get that? How are you so sure? And so my friend offered to study the Bible with me so that I could be certain as well. And it just totally opened my eyes. All the puzzle pieces that I'd always wondered about in my faith finally fell into place. It was a very freeing kind of feeling. And so I got baptized in April of 2009, my freshman year of college.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, I grew up in our family of churches. So I grew up in the Hampton Roads area, and I'm very grateful for my upbringing. I'm very grateful to have been a part of a strong family of churches, both in Hampton Roads, but also in that ACR region. And I know there's a lot of people that laid down a lot of hard work and a lot of prayer to really allow me to be a part of that great foundation. However, I was pseudo baptized when I was 13, is what I like to call it. And so I was baptized, but I understood very little. I was immature, and I think some people can be baptized at that age, and they do great. And I have friends who were and still are doing great. But that was an ongoing nagging doubt in my mind as I grew up and as I entered into my university years, which kind of culminated to a few things happening. As I myself started to study the Bible with people and help other people to become Christians, I realized what I was doing, what laying out the scriptures for people, calling people to the scriptures, was something that I hadn't experienced myself yet.
Mm.
And I wasn't changing anything. I wasn't, adding any extra spices to what the Bible was saying. I was reading the Bible with people, and so that really started to raise a red flag for me. And then there was also a period, kind of about that same time in my early 20s, where there was still a lot of just worldliness, a desire for the world that was in my heart, and that came out in different ways. And so there was a period where I was quite frankly, being rebuked by people who loved me quite often. And coming through that period, I really experienced a genuine repentance for the first time. And that was a feeling of like, oh, this is what that feels like.
Mm.
this is what people have been talking about.
Mhm.
And that really raised, if there had been red flags, now there were alarms going off. Like, okay, I really need to make this right. So about that time there in my early 20s, I was baptized and haven't looked back since.
Wow. Were you in Hampton Roads then, or in college? Where did that happen?
Ironically enough, that whole process started in college, and it actually ended very early in my time here in Sweden, was where I was baptized.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so there was a back and forth process over about a 2-year period where I had really been wrestling with that.
Okay. Okay. For those who wrestle with that and those who struggle with it, like any advice you'd give to those who are not totally solid about their conversion?
Mm.
Hmm. What I would say is I was looking for someone else to tell me what where I stood with God. And no one can tell you that. No one can really do that. The only thing you can do is look into the scriptures yourself. But what I will say is you can't live with a splintered conscience.
Mm,
You can't. You just can't do it. You can't live for God. So you have to take the time to really figure that out.
right.
But obviously bring in some wisdom of those who are older and experienced. I was lucky enough to have people in my life that had been around for a while, and knew how to ask the right questions. So definitely take in that wisdom. But you really have to. What I did was I wrestled with the scriptures myself. I wrote a spiritual timeline out for myself,
Hmm.
and kind of tried to look at it neutrally. How would I study the Bible with me, if I was this person? If that makes sense. So that
Well, what was the turning point? How did you know, okay, I'm not right with God. I need to get baptized. Like what was the straw that broke that you go, okay, I have to make a decision on this?
there was no well when I hit that point where I felt like I really had to make a decision, it was actually um, coming back from there was a retreat or a conference that I had gone to. It was a sort of school of missions kind of session, and it was talking about obviously converting people, and it was just once again that same alarm of like, okay, I know this, but I haven't really experienced that.
Right.
And it wasn't anything extreme. It was just the basic, every church has their different first principles.
Right.
Hearing that yet again set off the alarm. So I pulled aside, the person who was my discipling mentor relationship, and I said, "Hey, I'm really having doubts about this."
Hmm.
And so we sat down and talked, and that was the input given me was you really need to figure this out once and for all.
Yeah,
um, you can't keep going with one foot in, one foot out, not being sure about where you are with God.
exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah.
other people wrestle with that. I think um, Andy Fleming, I believe, is one person I interviewed, had
Mhm.
a very similar situation. And so it's not uncommon. How'd you guys meet?
Well, we met in campus actually, but at that point we were acquaintances because we were part of a campus ministry that by the time we left was about 80.
Yeah.
And so we went to different universities. She went to the prestigious, wonderful Virginia Tech. I went to the smaller school down the road. And so we didn't know each other very well, but we both actually ended up over here. Um, we were both more or less 1-year challengers, and we
It was
we
coincidence that we happened to know each other
Mm,
when those positions were filled.
well, I think we were kind of brought over together as part of we became recommended from a recommended campus ministry, I would say, but it wasn't that we were a couple by any means. Um, when we got here, and we actually did not get along for what was it, 5 years?
5 years.
I mean, we really at different points really didn't get along, uh, but we were co-workers, and we we like to think of it as God was just sandpapering us for each other because we were both young and raw, and I had just become a Christian, and so there were a lot of ways that both of us had to grow. So that's how we met. But then after those years went by, the scale started to fall off, and then we started, you know, taking little steps towards each other, but then not being sure. And so I would say there was a process of about maybe a year where we were kind of trying to figure out, okay, do we really like each other here?
Yeah.
And there's obviously a lot more details to that story, but um, from the time we figured out that we really did like each other, we were dating what, like three weeks later,
Yeah.
and then engaged.
Like 5 months.
Yeah, 5 months after that. So
Wow.
it wasn't like we didn't know each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when did you guys get married?
August 2018, so 4 years ago.
August 2018. Not that long ago. How old are you guys?
I'm almost 33.
And I am 34, right? Yeah, I'm 34 years old.
Okay. Okay. So you guys, and you've just been married only 4 years. So you guys got married a little bit later, and then
Mhm.
how did you guys end up in Sweden? You both graduated around the same time, I'm assuming.
Hmm.
Yeah, we've lived here now for 10 years. We both moved in 2012. And the way we ended up here, Shane graduated in December. I graduated in May. But so around that time, in the fall, we had a meeting with everyone, with all the seniors in our campus ministry, kind of talked about our church leaders at the time, Forrest and Mandy Vercel, were asking us what we were planning on doing after we graduated.
Mm.
And I had, over the summer, decided that I would want to do a 1-year challenge after I graduated. So it's a whole story to how I came to that conclusion, but I told that to them. I was like, I'm going to do something after I graduate. And so afterwards, Mandy was like, hey, actually, I've heard about this opportunity in Sweden. And I said, okay, sign me up. That's what I'll do. I'll go to Sweden. So of course, I didn't really know anything about it. And so I kind of started the process of having some interviews and learning about the country and learning about the church situation and maybe how I could serve there.
Mm.
And yeah, that started the process that became what the plan was. And so I moved in October of 2012. And so it was right after I graduated, essentially.
And I had a fairly similar mentality. I think we're both that way, where we feel like if God calls us, we go.
Yeah.
So I felt that, okay, here am I, send me. That was very much a mentality that I had. There's a lot of other things that I have issues with, but that's one of the good things. But even in that whole process, I had also interviewed and kind of said, okay, if this works out, we're in. But I had graduated at that point, and then I didn't hear back from this end, from the church here in Sweden, for a couple months. So I continued working. I had been working at a cafe part time during my time at university. So I continued working there full time after I graduated, as I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and hadn't heard back from Sweden. I'm working at this cafe. Okay, God, where do you want me to go? What should I do? Well, lo and behold, if not, one day, one of my old professors, whom I had worked very closely with, he was kind of in some of my more intensive major classes that I was a part of, and he comes up to me and he says, "Shane, I have a job for you. It's a full-time paid internship. It will lead to full-time employment. They want me to send the people to them." It was at the corporate offices of Advanced Auto Parts in Roanoke, Virginia. And so he said, "Let me know. You have 48 hours. Otherwise, I move on to the next person." And so I thought, well, here it is. Here's my sign from God. The very same day on my lunch break, I get a voicemail from Forrest Vercel, and he tells me, "Hey, I know you had kind of put Sweden out of your thoughts, and you thought they weren't interested anymore, but I just got off the line with them last night. They're very interested. They really want to move forward with you. So let's talk." And that was God's total way of giving me, you have 48 hours to decide. this next fork in your life. Because had I had longer, I would have talked myself out of it. I would have reasoned my way into finding logical excuses to not take the step of faith. But God helped me by crunching that time into a 2-day period. So here am I, here we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got offered a position in the corporate world with a strong corporation, and also going on was it a 1-year challenge? Is that the offer that they gave you?
More or less for me, for Vicky, it was a 1-year challenge. For me, it was a bit more of a proper employment because I actually have type 1 diabetes. So I was very clear that I need healthcare. So they put together a proper employment package for me, but it was kind of on a 1-year sort of
trial basis
because they didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was essentially what happened.
Okay, type 1 diabetes. Can you explain what that is?
Type 1 diabetes, that's diabetes that is genetic, where your pancreas doesn't produce, I don't know how technical you want me to get. Essentially, I have to regulate my own insulin levels manually because my body doesn't produce it, which regulates your blood sugar levels. And so I've had that since I was 2.5 years old.
Wow.
So I don't know life without it, which in some ways is a blessing. Other ways, it has its detriments as well.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? Like what's your routine? How do you maintain your health?
Well, there's pre-baby and post-baby, i.e. there's not as much exercise as there used to be. But that was definitely a part of it, was maintaining a lot of exercise and physical activity. I am always thinking about what I eat. So I eat very low carb. I have to regulate that with my insulin levels. I have to make sure that I do my best to sleep well. There's always just a bit of forward thinking and forethought to how I go about my day, what I eat, where I'm going to be meeting people. But it's helped me very much actually since I was pretty young. I was forced to learn discipline. So in that way, it has been a blessing.
Wow. Okay. So you're giving yourself shots?
Yeah, I take injections. I take insulin injections after every meal. I probably take about 7 or 8 injections a day.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. So like manually, or do you have like a pump? Do you help me out here a little bit? Like what does it look like?
So yeah, I take them manually. I used to have an insulin pump, but now I'm back to manual injections. When I wake up, I usually take 2 different types of insulin right when I wake up, and I skip breakfast. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard of intermittent fasting. So I don't usually eat until about 12:30, 1 in the afternoon, because that just kind of helps to give me a steady baseline. And I actually prefer that. That's not really a sacrifice of any sort. And then injections throughout the day after I eat lunch and dinner, and every now and then just to regulate if things are a bit off. And if I get a low blood sugar, I'll usually kind of feel that in my there's different symptoms where you can actually feel that. So then I'll have to maybe eat a bit of small piece of chocolate or something like that. So it's just a constant maintenance where you get to a decent level of understanding where you can just maintain.
Wow.
But I've certainly had my challenges, especially in my teenage years. Those were quite challenging at different points.
Oh.
But now it's quite manageable, and there's a great healthcare system over here. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
Nationalized medical care, I'm assuming. Okay. How has that affected you, Victoria?
Yeah, it has, it kind of changes some of the practicals of mostly how I eat also, or how I think about,
She loves pasta.
I don't eat low carb. So I think it it affected kind of maybe how I thought about food, or how we think about family and food, and how we think about our times together. And but otherwise it doesn't necessarily, and maybe long term, like Shane is actually, he's really great about taking care of his health. He's so great about it. If he weren't, I would have to consider the long-term effects of, maybe a shorter lifespan for him, or all the other symptoms like blindness, or things that can really impact your body
Right.
for the long-term effects of diabetes. But luckily, Shane takes great care of himself. So it's kind of mostly, we have a system of we eat our dinners together as a family, and those are more adapted to what would be best for him. And then we kind of do our own meals, and yeah, there's still a lot of freedom
Breakfast
and
and lunch.
flexibility. Yeah.
I see. So on lunchtime and breakfast, you do your own thing, and then on dinner, you make something more catered to
Yeah.
Shane. Okay.
Yep.
So when you guys were dating and getting engaged, this must have been a subject of conversation. I mean, from what I understand, diabetes, like you mentioned, it has the capacity to shorten your lifestyle, or your lifespan. Yeah.
Yeah, it came up in our engagement, or pre-marriage counseling, for sure, but it wasn't I don't remember it being a big topic of conversation. That was
I think
because
because Shane manages it so well, and he's very knowledgeable and so educated and very on top of it. I think that it made me feel secure in a future together. It's not like something that was like an immediate kind of death sentence or anything, because he takes
Right.
great care of himself.
Right.
And we are very blessed to have access to great medical care for it as well.
Wow.
It would only be, we talked about it in the premarital counseling, and in the effect of like how it might affect our future children, for example, if they could inherit it. But it was nothing that seemed to be like a red flag. And yeah, like I said, Shane is just manages it very well and is very knowledgeable.
Okay. So you have a daughter named Alma, and how old is Alma?
14 months.
And she doesn't have diabetes?
No, it tends to skip a generation when it comes to the type 1 genetic variant. So it would more be her kids that would have to look out.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I'll definitely be praying for you. It blows me away that you're willing to go on the mission team with a disability like that. That's a very serious disability. That's pretty gutsy.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I should say too much, but it's yeah. The healthcare here is very, very good. I'll just put it that way.
Okay.
I'm grateful that God brought me here.
Okay. All right. Well, what even? It's interesting. You guys both ended up in Sweden. What got you interested in missions? Like, what? You didn't like each other. You didn't know each other too well, but all of a sudden, you guys are like, hey, we both want to go into missions, and you end up in the same spot. What? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, on that side of it, it was kind of independent of one another. It felt secure, like, oh, great, there's someone who's familiar with my home culture, and we have the same friends, we know the same people. That'll feel like a secure point. But otherwise, I think my interest in missions, honestly, it was no great dream or ambition of mine. It was a calling, it felt like. And sort of how Shane was talking about earlier, a here am I, send me sort of mentality. I had spent time in different countries, and had kind of an idea of it'd be wonderful to live in another place. And I kept noticing maybe different moments, both large and small, that I felt like God was asking me to step up more in my heart for the mission. And I wanted to take small steps in that. And eventually I got to a point where I was like, I have been resisting God. I just have to repent. And so let me just say yes. And I felt like God had built my faith to get to that point where I could really say yes to how I felt nudged to kind of step up more. More specifically, one of those moments was I spent a summer in Ukraine before between my junior and senior year of college, and it gave me a different perspective of missions and ministry, and it really was like, oh, maybe this is something I could do, and kind of had a more idea of what it would look like if I weren't also a student at the same time, and just a very different experience on it practically. And it really gave me more inspiration and faith of like, okay, this is a step I could really take, and I can't say no to God anymore. So my original intention was to just do a 1-year challenge and then anywhere, anywhere, and then pursue my master's. And so my 1-year challenge has turned into a 10-year challenge. And,
Okay.
as I often joke, but I think at the root of it, in the idea of foreign missions, I think for me now, like living here for 10 years, it isn't foreign missions for me anymore. It's my whole life. It's my home. This is my local mission field now for
Right.
me,
Wow.
is Stockholm and is Sweden. And I think that at the root of it, I really believe in what God wants to do. I believe in that. And I think that it helps me then, if it's foreign or local, it has changed my heart. Doing the mission has changed my heart for the mission, truly. And my interest and my dreams for it have deepened the more that I practice it. But that was maybe the original push to come here, was just repentance, and to no longer resist those nudges that I felt like God was building up my faith for.
Okay, so you take off for a 1-year challenge. You don't come back. Okay, your parents must have been freaking out there along the line. Like, wait a second, what happened to the 1-year part? Why did you stay so long?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I when I grew up, I moved around a lot, so I was used to this change and temporary here, temporary there. And I think Sweden was the first place that when I considered the dreams that I had for it, or ideas that I started to have, or things that would be amazing to see happen, I realized for the first time it wasn't just a short term, oh, this semester, I would like to see this happen, or like, oh, if that person could grow during the summer, longer than just 3 months. The ideas that I started to have would require more long term. And I think also, so I felt like I need to stay and see it out. And another factor for it was that I worked a lot with the teens when I first came. And honestly, it just took a year to build trust with them. So I also felt like now I finally have something to build on. Like, why would I leave?
Right.
So that was also a motivating factor, was to actually build on what it took a year to lay a groundwork for.
Wow. Okay. How about you, Shane? Why did you end up staying so long?
Yeah. Well, I think it was similar for me staying so long, in the sense of that there's only so much you can do in a year. And I don't want to dissuade anyone from a 1-year challenge by any means, but we're in the business of relationships. We have a relationship with God, and we have relationships with other people, and we try and help other people to understand the relationship with God. And relationships are long term. So that was definitely one factor. And it was also, as well, even the same idea that kind of got me over here in the first place, which was um, quite a pragmatic thing at the end of the day. But as I had been floating around as coming into being a campus student, and pretty much being a kingdom kid on cruise control that really wasn't sure where he was with God. So you can imagine how effective and on fire I was, which wasn't at all. And Ed Anton, he probably doesn't even remember having this conversation with me, but he pulled me aside after church when I was home on summer break, and kind of asked what my plans were. And it was something not inspiring. And said, Shane, you should really strive for the greater gifts that Paul talks about in First Corinthians. You should strive for those, because God has invested too much in you for you to just sit on what's been given to you. Wow. And to not give it to others. And it was like a 30-second drive by.
Yeah.
discipling time, but that really sat with me because it struck a chord. He is right. And that kind of set me on a trajectory to really to strive for that, to use what God has given to me in order to pay it forward and not to just rest on comfortability. And that's also what's kind of kept me over here during the hard times of just really knowing, okay, I'm going to keep striving. I'm going to keep going for it until God says no.
Yeah.
And if God says no, and we've actually talked about this, if God says no, we're content. I mean, we're happy to follow where God leads us, but until He does that, we're not going to stop. So that
awesome.
with that, with all that being said, yeah, life may happen. I mean, who are we to really decide our future at the end of the day? But
right.
And I think this sense of calling also is similar of, it really is, this is the context that God has asked me to serve Him in, and I'll do that until He says stop, and then I'll just serve Him in whatever the next context is. So part of it is, that's also part of why I've stayed, is, I don't know, God has put me here and He hasn't told me to go.
Right. I remember when we were in Japan and we were there the second summer that we were there, and I remember looking around. We were in Shibuya, this huge area that, tons and tons of thousands of people walking all around, and just kind of going, well, this feels so weird that we're here for a second summer. I went there thinking we were going to be gone after, within a year or something. And it was very strange to just start to accumulate years in the same place. And then before I knew it, 10 years had passed by. It just goes by, starts to accelerate, doesn't it? It just goes by really fast. Especially after that first year. Well, can you give a little background for those who are listening around the world about the history of the church in Stockholm? Who planted it? When was it planted?
The church was originally planted in, I believe, 1986. And that was a small team of people that were sent over from Boston, including Andy Fleming was on that team, Chris Reed, who both of whom you've mentioned, and a few other people. Mostly some Finnish sisters came on that team, because a lot of Finns actually speak Swedish as well. And that church in Stockholm grew to different points throughout the 90s. I think up to the largest was I think they were at 185 maybe.
Wow.
And that church planted Copenhagen, Oslo was planted, as well as Helsinki, and then eventually Reykjavik, which is a city in Iceland. And then a few other smaller plantings have been sent out throughout the years as well. Vatican in Norway has been sent out, and there's been growth, and then people sadly leaving the fellowship throughout the different years, in all of those different churches. Particularly here in Stockholm, when we arrived, the church was at about 120. In what would have that been, 2012. Yes, and now it's back up to about 180 at the moment, which is very encouraging. And full disclosure, we weren't leading the church during that time. We were interns, teen and campus interns throughout most of that time. It's only the past couple of years that we've stepped into the role of leading the church. So Stockholm is at about 180. And the Nordic region as a whole is just around 350 disciples at the moment.
Which would be Iceland, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden.
Yeah.
Okay. Iceland. One more time.
Iceland, Norway,
Denmark.
Sweden, Finland, Denmark.
Yeah. And Iceland right now has a small group of 4 disciples. It's 4 disciples, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're looking to figure out replanting actually the capital city of Reykjavik in Iceland. So for all of those who have a heart for Scandinavian missions, and
there's a few places we could send you.
Yeah, there's a few places.
That's exciting. Okay, so there's 4 disciples there in Reykjavik. How do you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Reykjavik.
lot of famous CrossFit athletes from Iceland. So maybe that's a selling point there. If you ever watch if you ever watch
a lot of large fellows there.
What's that?
There's a lot of large people there.
Okay. All right. So that's interesting. And then, so you guys started leading. How did you guys take over the leadership? Like, how did you step into that? That's a big step.
Kim and Chris Reed were leading the church here. They planted it, and they helped. Then in the 80s, and they planted Copenhagen, and then they had some time back in America, and then they moved back to Sweden in 2009 to lead the church. And then they had been looking to eventually down the road move back to America to be closer to family, and some different situations that were on their heart with their family to help care for them. And they eventually got offered a position. I know you've talked with them. They now live in Salt Lake City. And so they, in great faith, had decided to move back to America. And we were offered and talked about, should we step into their role? And so we said yes to that. And so is it 2 years or is it a year and a half?
I'm not sure. Yeah, it was during COVID, so who knows?
And then we had a baby right after. Yeah. So it was, it's been a lot of transitions.
Wow.
But that was another situation where God had just made so many things quite clear.
Yeah.
Of opened and closed doors. So as daunting as the task is, there was also a security there where we felt like this is a clear calling and this is a clear next step right now. So we stepped into that role.
Yeah.
Which has been exciting and scary and fulfilling, and in the midst of having a brand new 1-year-old.
Wow. Okay. So that is really exciting. Okay. Let me just back it up a little bit. So you got there in 2012. How long did it take you to learn the language? Where when I say learn it, like you feel comfortable speaking it, you're able to study the Bible with people, you understand what the sermons are saying, and you feel pretty comfortable. You understand what's happening in the nightly news broadcasts, that kind of proficiency.
That's a good description.
Yeah. I think for me, it was maybe after a little more than a year, I felt like I don't have to switch to English. And my Swedish has gotten a lot better since then,
I bet.
For sure. But maybe a little more than a year.
She was about a year. Vicky had already picked up a few languages at that point. She won't say it herself, but she's very gifted with languages. This was the first time I had really tried. So it took me a little bit longer, I would say about 2 years. And it wasn't until some of the teens commented to me, Victoria does everything in Swedish. Why don't you? That actually got my competitive fires burning. I was like, all right, it's time to set the buckle down here.
Okay. I want to just take a little bit of a side trip here, because this is whenever people ask me about my experience in Japan, they always say, how long did it take you to learn Japanese? And it seems like it took me forever, but give 5 tips for a person who's going overseas to learn the language most quickly.
I have a couple off the top of my head, and you can maybe fill in.
Might not be 5, but we'll do our best.
Okay.
The biggest thing for me was that I had to get over looking stupid.
Right.
Oh, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to get over looking stupid. People are going to laugh at you, and they're not laughing out of anything sinful. When you realize after the fact the mistake you made, you would laugh too. So you have to get over that. I would say once you get to a certain point, there's a lot of resources. There's podcasts out there where you can really just listen to people speaking and really fully immerse yourself and take it in.
Mm-hmm.
So those were a couple things that really helped me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you would.
Yeah, I think definitely that of immersion and being willing to look stupid. And I think just you have to be motivated.
Yeah.
You have to remind yourself, why am I putting myself through this? It's exhausting. It's embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
It's slow. You feel like a toddler, like you want to do more than what you're actually capable of. There's like a discrepancy there. And so I think you have to really be motivated.
Right.
And that can be a lot of different, maybe individual reasons.
Right.
I think there's a spiritual motivation as well, that Paul really did everything he could to be all things to all people. So I think there is actually a spiritual component that you really should respect the people that you're coming to,
right,
and learn their language as best you can.
Yeah.
Now, Swedish is not as hard as Japanese, so it's maybe easy for us to say.
I think I felt, the spiritual aspect of it, I felt like I wanted to really be humble of, I'm coming here to serve you and to expect you to cater to me, or that I'm going to set limits on how far I'm willing to go, especially with language. I think originally I was only going to be here for a year. So my goal was more to be able to understand rather than to speak, so that someone could speak to me fully and be able to express themselves fully, especially at the time we were working with teens. And it's hard as a teen to even know what you think to begin with, let alone say it in not your native language. So I really just wanted people to be able to be themselves. And my goal was to have the comprehension so that people would feel comfortable, like, okay, she'll understand me if I say this the way I really think it. But the speaking developed from that as well.
Right. Now, we talked about this in the pre-interview, and you were a Spanish major at Virginia Tech, which, with the name Virginia Tech, that's a little bit of a funny place to learn Spanish, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That was part of why I felt like God had sent me to Virginia Tech, was because I am not an engineer or an architect or interested in agriculture, or vet school, which is main reasons you might go to Virginia Tech. It was the only school I got accepted to, and my interests were completely elsewhere. And I felt like it's this or don't go to college. And it's I regret feeling that way, because Virginia Tech is an amazing school. And I had a lot of arrogance and own plans and ideas for my own life, but I chose Spanish because it was something that I was very interested in, and I was planning on transferring, but I became a Christian and wanted to stay to build my faith.
Wow.
So I had a Spanish major at an engineering school, which it actually helped a lot because it meant that I had a lot of control over my free time, or over my schedule. It gave me a lot of free time in it, and that I ended up using it to study the Bible with people, which also, there was some of those things that I was referring to of God nudging me more into missions. So yeah, I would meet people and they would just ask, what kind of engineering do you study?
Right.
Oh, I'm not an engineer. I study Spanish. Like, what are you going to do with that? I was like, well, I'm actually moving to Sweden. Like, do they speak Spanish there? I was like, no, they don't. Do you speak their language? It's like, no, I don't. So it became an easy way, because people are like, why on earth are you moving there? So easy way to share my faith with people.
Exactly. Now, Shane, what was your major at Virginia Tech?
I didn't go to Virginia Tech.
I'm sorry. You went to Bradford. Is that right?
Radford University. So Vicky's being modest. She was waitlisted at William and Mary in UVA, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, which are very prestigious institutions. Her safety school, Virginia Tech, was the school that I couldn't get into if I tried.
That was her backup.
Well, I can vouch it. So Radford University was where I went, and I actually have a very like a niche degree in what's called business and technical writing, which is kind of a linguistic sort of communication sort of degree.
I see. Got it.
So people will often work with in sort of engineering branches in order to take care of the communication aspect of the engineering fields.
Okay, I want to go back to the language issue, because that it's funny. I wish I could go back into a time machine sometimes and go back to when we first arrived in Japan in 1993, because I've thought a lot about it. I mean, I really put a lot into learning the language. We went to Japanese school, but I think, okay, you're absolutely right. First of all, dealing with your pride, the pride issue of not wanting to look foolish. That's huge. You have to be able to accept the fact that you're going to look stupid. That's huge. I wish that I had, going back, I would do things differently. Basically, I would turn on the TV full time, turn on the radio full time, and just listen to it, even though I wasn't actually listening to it, just to get comfortable with the pacing and the style of the language. That would have definitely helped a lot. And then I think also focusing a lot more on the oral language rather than the written. I was really focused a lot on learning how to write because it really bugged me that I couldn't read. And so I focused a lot on the writing, but the writing is, you're trying to connect with people. It's all about, like you said, it's all about the relationships. Writing is something you can learn as secondarily. So I definitely would wish, I feel like I could have way accelerated my learning had I done that better. But anyway, I think that's awesome that you guys did learn so quickly as you did. What's been most challenging about Stockholm?
What's been most challenging? The winter darkness. Although that was a bit of a shock, but just kidding. You get used to that. I think it is a very secular culture here, in Sweden in general, but definitely Stockholm being a big city, and it's secular in the sense of um, for most of the time that we've been here, it's actually been there's been a bit of an edge even towards Christianity, so it hasn't always been neutral in its secularity, but really maybe anti-Christian is too strong, but there's definitely been there's been an edge towards you if you have a Christian faith. So, for example, they teach religion in high schools here
much earlier.
Well, yeah, actually, yeah, they start much earlier. Yeah, so the school systems will teach religion as a subject, and it's kind of up to the teacher's discrepancy how they choose to teach it, but they'll often teach students that this is why those people in different places believe this, but we know this isn't true. And so often our teens who are becoming Christians or figuring out their faith, it's not been a rare occasion where they've actually held a presentation in their class, in their religion class. Well, this is why I actually am a Christian, or they'll spark up a debate where they're kind of talking at different sides of the room, and it's one Christian versus the rest of the classroom where they're having to defend their faith. So that was a bit of a shock, but it's been challenging in the sense of, I like a good challenge. I like to grow in certain ways. So in that sense, it's been fun. We study the Bible differently with people here. We do Bible talks differently. We actually don't call them Bible talks because even that phrase might scare a lot of people away. We preach in a certain way where we're really trying to reach people who don't have a faith. So it's been a challenge, but it's also been fun and refreshing in some ways, I would say.
Yeah.
And we're just really proud of the disciples here who have really had to fight for their faith, and quite frankly, in ways that one doesn't have to in America, at least not up to this point. So people have really done a great job here, the disciples.
Yeah. And to that point, when I first moved here, I remember one of the first conversations I had with somebody on campus, I had mentioned like, oh, I've just moved here. I just graduated. I'm from America. Yeah, I'm here with my church. I'm a Christian. And he was like, oh, okay. Well, it's because your education in America is so poor that you're a Christian. If you had better education like we do, you wouldn't believe in God either. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, what? So
not everyone is like
no,
that.
Right. And even the culture has changed that. But I was like, oh, no one's ever said that to me before. But I think the culture has changed also since then. People have become more spiritual, which is, a new challenge of people have, by and large, mostly I find maybe rejected religion. And before that meant that they would be atheist, but people are more open to believing in something spiritual, but still not into religion, so to speak. So learning how to relate to people and take them where they're at. I think for me, a challenge has just kind of been that whole concept of being all things to all people. When I moved, I decided that I would take Paul's perspective to heart and become a Swede to win the Swedes. And I decided, if there's something that I, would have to choose between the way that I would do it in America versus the way a Swede would do it, as long as it doesn't conflict with Jesus, I'll do it the Swedish way. And to really kind of give yourself wholeheartedly to a different world can feel challenging, and it letting yourself change and adapt and learn all these new things. And I think even just the challenge of, wow, what does this mean for my own faith? The questions that people are bringing up or perspectives that I've heard, like it's always a challenge to really be thinking about, what do I believe, and what does the Bible say, and how do I, relate to this question, and yeah, you kind of get challenged a little bit more frequently. And like Shane said, most of the time it's like a ooh, challenge, kind of exciting sort of challenge, but there have been the difficult kinds of
Sure.
challenges as well
Sure.
that come with that.
What does that mean to you? What does that look like when you say all things to all people? Like what's changed?
It's everything from I recycle now to it could be something as small as that to listening, being aware of, like, I listen to what Swedes listen to, and I can understand the way they think about issues and talk about that, and how I dress or how I talk or where I go, or I never wear flip-flops, or just things like that, small details and large details. um
I can give an example as well. Like when we share our faith with people out on
yeah, that's a big
campus and
one.
have a Bible talk, for example, we'll usually stop people and invite them to a spiritual discussion that we're having about life topics and faith topics, and we'll be very clear that we're Christians that started this group, but we're really open and wanting to have a good exchange. We look at the Bible. We also really want to hear other people's opinions. We look at other, different viewpoints on the topic. And so for us, that's inviting someone to a Bible talk,
Mm-hmm.
to really explain what you're doing so that you're reaching people where they're at, because a Bible talk just sounds foreign, and even the way we do a Bible talk is different. It's a little more Paul in Athens versus Peter in Acts 2.
Mm.
Right.
Just to be able to meet people where they're at. But we had to learn. We had to learn, and we had to read and really be immersed in the culture in order to meet people where they were at.
Let's talk a little bit about the darkness. We're recording this on December 13th. We're about a week away from the winter solstice, shortest day of the year. What time is it getting light there, and what time is it sunset?
I just looked it up today. Sunrise was 8:35 in the morning, and sunset was 2:48.
Oh my gosh, 8:30 to 3 p.m. That's crazy.
9 to 3, yeah, is kind of probably around 9 to 3 is a good estimate. But in the summer, it's the opposite, where it's light for 6 hours in the winter, but in the summer it's dark for 6 hours. So
If even sometimes. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
Are
and
there
that's just kind of over the horizon, so you still have the whatever that's called.
The
Yeah,
haze, yeah.
dawn,
okay,
dusk.
so that would be a real challenge. I mean, in the wintertime, how do you keep your faith growing? How do you keep yourself pumped up in a secular environment and in the darkness?
Well, for the darkness, I take vitamin D. And you watch your mental health. You really take care of that. That's a big issue here. I've learned way more, speaking of all things to all people, I've learned way more about mental health, and from what I've understood in America, it's talked about a lot more than maybe when I lived there. But it's something I've really had to learn how to minister to, and understand and relate and connect into a faith way. And so I take care of my mental health, and I take vitamin D. And I think to keep my faith up, I did struggle with depression for a little while, and that specifically, I had a little plan for myself of spiritually, what are the things that I'm going to do today. I just had a very short list of, if nothing else today, I will read something, I will pray, I will find one person I can be giving to, just to kind of keep myself baseline in my faith. I think I try to really go to the scriptures with a lot of the questions that come up, or issues, or things that might challenge. I try to learn, and I try to understand. I try to go to the scriptures, and I try to stay connected with people. I've had different periods of time where I'm more connected with Christians, or I feel more isolated, or I'm more connected with people outside of Stockholm, or I feel more isolated. And I notice a big difference in my faith with that, which is a very basic principle, but not the less true for its simplicity. Sticking to the basics, I think, and really the things that make faith grow, quite simply, are always work in that sense.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, I mean, I definitely agree, just sticking to the scriptures and the simple Bible reading and prayer. I know there's a lot of different, there's all kinds of sort of podcasts you can listen to, which are great. I mean, I subscribe to like 5 or 6 myself, but just never get away from the scriptures,
right,
and just reading large chunks of scripture. I mean, there's something supernatural that happens when you interact with the Bible, and you're in good prayer, and to just keep the main thing to be out there meeting new people. That helps me a lot. Just keep just to keep my inspiration up, to keep my faith up, even if it goes terrible that day. I mean, to go out rejoicing and to come back rejoicing, because you're out there doing the will of God, and we can't control the result. So that helps me, just to keep myself out there doing what I know I'm called to do, and I know what I ultimately like to do. It just sometimes takes grabbing yourself by the collar every now and then, and pulling yourself out there.
Right. Well, that's super practical. Staying spiritual, reading your Bible, setting up a basic action plan so that you don't get lost in your thoughts and you're actually doing something. Those are really, really helpful. What are the people like in Sweden? Like, can you give us a profile of the average Swedish person? I mean, how does that affect people with all that darkness? Are they depressed? Are they solemn people? Give me a snapshot.
Well, I think we mostly Stockholm.
Yeah, I would want to say we live in Stockholm, but most of Sweden is actually countryside. So we can only speak to Stockholm. So if there's a random Swede out there listening, I wouldn't want to offend them. But, people here are definitely more reserved, I would say. So when you're preaching here, you're not going to get the amens and the come on.
There's no preach it bros in the audience.
It doesn't really happen. You find other ways to pick up on, okay, are people with me or not? But yeah, people are more reserved for sure, and there's not going to be a ton of small talk and talking to strangers on the street. That doesn't really happen. But if you become friends with someone, that person is your friend for life, and they will really be there for you.
Yeah.
So there's not this false veneer that can maybe happen in other places, which I ultimately appreciate, where you have people. But yeah, there's definitely, when the winter rolls around, people definitely tend to keep to themselves, and people are definitely more reserved then, and but people here they love taking care of the environment. They are really proud of the social welfare system that's in place that really genuinely helps people. So there's a lot of really good things about Swedes, and that's not even talking about the church here. The church here,
right,
we could brag about people for hours.
Right, right.
And I think I would just add that Swedes tend to be very generous and philanthropic. Um, they are, I would say they're accepting. Like they are very like, okay, people can just think what they want, people can do what they want. Um, People also are quite independent, I would say, but also the way that the society is set up, it's true. Like if you're connected to somebody, you're with them for the rest of your life, and they are very devoted to that. And yeah, but I would say a lot of people struggle with mental health, and there's pros and cons to all of these. There's always two sides to every coin, you know. But I think those would be the positive aspects of a lot of those characteristics and qualities. Um,
Is there a
yeah.
higher incidence of alcoholism? Are there particular sins that show up in that culture because of the secular influence, the darkness?
No, the alcoholism is. Oh, no, I was going to make a joke. There's another Nordic country that's known for the alcoholism, but no, there's definitely there's high divorce rates here, very high divorce rates, and definitely high rates of different mental health issues that are quite prevalent. And it's not just statistics on a sheet of paper. As you talk to people and you get to know people, um, I haven't, it's rare that I meet someone out on campus or even teenagers who haven't grown up in the church, whose parents are still together. It's incredibly rare.
Wow.
So that's definitely one of the big things that you notice. So
Okay. Well, when you look back on the past 10 years, what's been the most rewarding for you?
I think
you got
some
one
of
more?
it, no, some of it is we've seen dreams come true, really. I think one of the main things we were going to do when we moved here was originally we are like, okay, we're going to do campus, and we came as, you know, 22, 23-year olds, and there was one other person in their 20s in the church at the time. And we were there to sort of fill in the gap. The church was kind of uh, the teens and their parents, and nobody really quite in between, and maybe some older singles. And we came to fill in that gap. And now in the church, I would say it's over 30 people who are in their 20s.
Wow.
And that is the kind of thing that happens over time. I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, that 1 year where we baptized 50 20-year olds. It's one of those fruits of really building relationships long term, and people coming in and finding faith. I'd say I think it really has been rewarding, just that long term, the fruits that only come from long term kind of faith. And we've seen God do amazing things, short term, miraculous things that felt that one cool moment that was amazing, but really just the fruit of real life faith over a long time. For me personally, that's been very rewarding since, like I said, I'd moved a lot. So this is personally a place where people have known me for a long time now, and to see, for example, someone who is a newly baptized teen when we moved here is now himself helping a lot with the teens and is leading our worship, and those kinds of fruits of just persevering and having faith in a consistent and daily way over a long period of time, to see new people become Christians and then become leaders, or to see our mature Christians who have been around for decades finding lots of new ways to innovate and be devoted in their faith to
mm,
Jesus. And you really just kind of those things that you only see over a long period of time
Mm.
is actually what I found most rewarding. The things that make up the rich daily life of a Christian in the church life. And like Shane said, we could brag about the church for hours.
Yeah.
And I think to see that has been really rewarding, to see the growth and the change.
yeah, and I would add that maybe an example of this was even just the other night. I was in a Bible study with a young man in his 20s, and there were two brothers in the Bible study with me who were also guys in their 20s, and it just kind of struck me that I had the honor of studying the Bible with both of those guys when they were campus students, and now now they're out of campus, they're graduated, they have good jobs, they're married, they're just solid, stable, serving people in the church, and here we are, all studying the Bible with this guy together. So for me, I know a lot of people love the big numbers and everything, and of course, we want to see churches planted and all of that. But just seeing the disciples who make disciples who make disciples, and seeing lives change, I love that. And we've been able to as well send out. When I say the church is 180, some of that is Stockholm, but some of that is actually a city to the south of Stockholm, about an hour away, and then a city to the north of Stockholm, about an hour away, where we've sent house church plantings to both those places, and seen them grow in different ways. So that's been really inspiring as well, and seeing people kind of get back the dream and the faith that, like, we can do this. God can do this. Things can happen. So that's been really, really cool to just be a part of, and to see ourselves and see our own faith grow.
That's awesome. Now, it must have been a little challenging stepping into the shoes of the Reeds. I mean, they've been there forever, been around a long time, and then all of a sudden you guys are taking over. Did you get a lot of support from the church in taking over?
Yeah.
A ton of support. And we work closely with actually a leadership group, a leadership team. So that's been really, really helpful to have their support, and to really, in different ways, kind of lead the charge together. So that's been really good. And we've, we felt a lot of love and support from the different house church leaders, and well, pretty much everyone, for that matter. So people were definitely happy when they heard that we were stepping into that role.
That's awesome.
As much as they miss the Reeds, of course.
For people listening who are thinking about maybe considering going overseas, doing missionary work, any advice you give them? Like, if someone's wavering on the brink, should I? Maybe, I talk to people quite often actually who would love to do missionary work, but they're afraid. Any advice you'd give to a person?
Yeah, go for it. If you have nothing holding you back, if there's no, I know people have very real life things that they need to take care of, and there's familial issues and all that, which I totally get and respect. And Paul writes that if you don't take care of your own family, for example, you're worse than the pagans. But if you don't have those things in your life, then go for it. You can always come back, but that experience will be invaluable, and you never know what might end up actually happening, and where God will take you and where God would lead you. Because I look back at my life, and there's many ways where I can look back and see how God was orchestrating something greater. And had I not been here, actually in relative to America, a foreign country, things might have actually been a lot more difficult even in America, but God led me here. So you never know. So you should go for it if you feel like God is calling you.
I totally agree. I think there's always maybe more specific advice I would give, like, given what they might be considering, or different situations. But I think the principle of it is go. Yeah, definitely do it. Yeah. And missions is missions. It's I remember getting the advice when I was interested in foreign missions, and I'll move somewhere else, really challenging my character of, it kind of starts with what I do here and now.
Right.
And if I'm not really a missionary here and now, what makes me think I would just magically do that when my life has been turned upside down somewhere else?
Exactly.
And sometimes, being put out of your context can really help you grow, but your conviction and your character really goes with you as well. And I think too, if you have the chance to just do something then like that, and I think you should.
Right. I totally agree with you. And what you said there, Shane, if nothing's holding you back, I mean, you have type 1 diabetes, that didn't hold you back. And so often there are things that hold us back. There's so many. It's by default, it's much easier to remain where you're at, and to get up and just move always incorporates some tearing away, relationship change, something like that. So I commend you. Any plan to go back to the States for you guys?
Hopefully our parents aren't listening to this, but not not no, not for the foreseeable future. But as I said, I mean, we know what the book of James says. Who am I to determine my own plans? But yeah, as far as we see it, no.
Hmm.
We're more thinking about like where are the next places in Sweden that we want to see planted, and the next, the plans in the Nordics, and not that we would necessarily go ourselves, but
Right.
we're thinking more in those
I love that.
terms.
I love that way of thinking. Any final words or advice you'd give to a person who wants to make this life count?
What would you say?
I would say essentially the same advice that was given to me when I was young, to strive for the greater spiritual gifts, to strive to do more for God, and to not strive after comfort, because God will comfort you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you make comfort your goal, if you make that what you're going for, because I think that can be the temptation. It's certainly been the temptation for me, and as I look around at my generation, that can definitely be something that is idolized. God will fix those things. He totally does. But yeah, just go for it. Take the steps. Take the risks. You don't want to be on your deathbed wondering what would have been. You know.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I might say something that's really helped me is to live according to your values and the principles, and the practicals are always flexible. They let you follow the spirit. They let you, it's to stay focused on the why, on the main thing, the values and the principles that drive those things, and let everything else be flexible and adaptable. I think would open you up to a lot of more opportunities, but also keep you strong in the ways that you need to be strong, and let the things that are negotiable be negotiable, and the things that are non-negotiable stay non-negotiable. And I think that might be what I would say.
Mm. That's awesome. Gosh, guys, I'm inspired. I'm inspired by what you guys have done and are doing to see the church strong and healthy there. I'm sure I know there's challenges coming out of COVID for every church that I've talked to, including our own. But the fact that you've gone on the mission field with a disability, you guys met, started, at least courted each other on the mission field, got married, took over an existing church, a long-standing church, and are continuing to plant churches. It's inspiring what you're doing. And, I just want to pray every blessing on the work you're doing, and let you know I'm thinking about you from the desert here in sunny Arizona. You guys got to come out here and visit and get a little, dose of vitamin D sometime. It'd be great to have you guys. Let me do this a little different ending. Would you guys mind saying a prayer in Swedish for our listeners, people listening, and just pray a blessing on the people who are listening, that that they will make this life count and live a no regrets life?
Yeah, not at all. Both of us, or
Yeah, why don't you each say a short prayer, and then we'll close out the interview.
Okay. Tack Gud för möjligheten att kunna träffas och prata om dig, prata om din mission. Vi tackar dig så mycket för möjligheten att kunna helt enkelt inspirera folk så bra som vi kan. Vi ber för alla som lyssnar på den här podden att du och heliga anden ska hjälpa oss och hjälpa dem. Vi ber att var och en av oss ska kunna höra exakt vad det är som vi behöver höra för att göra mer för dig, för att vara mer inspirerad för dig och för att kunna leva fullt ut för dig, för ditt namn, för din mission. Vi älskar dig och vi ber allt detta i Jesus namn. Amen.
Amen. Gud, himmelska far, tack så mycket för den här tiden på podden. Att du har gjort så himla mycket i våra liv. att vi kan ha mycket att prata om. Du har gjort mycket, vi ber i den här tiden har förhärligat dig. Att det kommer fram tydligt att det är ditt namn och ditt arbete och det är du helt enkelt Gud som har gjort allt det här. Tack för Jesus och hans förebild och hans arbete och det som han har åstadkommit. Vi ber att alla som lyssnar vill flytta till Norden. Vi ber att de ska vara med i våra framtida planteringar och vill vara med i vår kyrkofamilj här borta. Tack för ditt arbete här i Norden och din kärlek för oss Gud. Vi ber att de som lyssnar kan leva ett liv utan att ångra någonting. Vi ber att de kommer till tro om de behöver det. Och Gud välsigna dem. Vi älskar dig och vi ber det här i Jesus namn. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks so much for having us.
If you're enjoying this podcast, I'd like to ask your help and support through one of the following. First of all, hit the subscribe button. Secondly, post the episode and its link on your favorite social media site. Next, read one of my books, How to Plant and Grow a Church. Also, Courage, How to Make This Life Count. You can find both of those on Amazon.com or through IPI Books. And if you've read one of my books, please leave a review on Amazon. Finally, pray for me, for my wife, and for the church here in Tucson, because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, to live a no-regrets life, and to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day, and make this life count.